Donald Trump goes on Laura Ingraham last week and does an interview and basically went on to talk about why we needed 600,000 Chinese students to come here to subsidize our college industrial complex and push American students out of that market. And then also to talk about how great the economy is doing. It's just like his first term. You know, he gets in, says that the economy is the greatest it's ever been. And here, I'll just, you can listen to him.
We are doing phenomenally well. This is the greatest economy we've ever had. Their talking points, oh, costs are high, costs are high. By the way, the only thing is beef. Beef
Coffee.
is a little high because the ranchers are doing great. Coffee, we're going to lower some tariffs. We're going to have some coffee come in. We're going to take care of all this stuff very quickly, very easily. It's surgical. It's beautiful to watch. But our costs are way lower. Now, Walmart came out with a statement that they do every year for many, many decades. And they said that a Thanksgiving meal costs 25% less this Thanksgiving, coming up, think of that, than it did last Thanksgiving under Sleepy Joe Biden. That's a 25.
So you see, he's talking about, oh, people complain about the cost being high. The beef's high. He says the beef's high because the ranchers are doing so great. The ranchers aren't doing so great. It's more likely the meat processing factories, you know, the ones that have the regulatory capture on the industry. How about you get rid of some of the regulation? Get some of them out of the market. Maybe that'll bring the beef prices down. And then did you catch the part where Ingram points out that the coffee's up and Trump says they're going to reduce the tariffs? He's acknowledging right there that tariffs cause higher consumer prices. You see, the foreign countries aren't paying the tariffs. It's importers here that are paying the tariffs, and then they pass the prices on to you. So you, the consumer, are the ones paying the tariffs. And Trump talked about how it was surgical. What they're doing to the economy is surgical. That sounds a lot like a central planner. That sounds like somebody that thinks that they can control the economy. That's socialism. That's not a free market capitalist talking there. That is socialist ideology. You know, Trump says it's the best economy ever. Then why did he just pass a budget with a nearly $2 trillion deficit? Inflation, according to CPIs, still at 3% and trending up. Gold is at an all-time high, and investors don't typically pour into gold when they think everything's great. They're doing that because we're debasing our currency. Real unemployment's at 8.1%. Now that's going off the U6 number. So like the number that you'll typically see reported is the U3 number. And that, I think the last number is at 4.3%. But that's because U3 is a more favorable number. That's why they report it. That's just like depending on if the headline inflation number or the core adjusted inflation number is what they report for CPI. They report the U3 because it's more favorable. See, the U3 unemployment number excludes the underemployed, which those are workers that are working part-time because they can't find full-time work. And it also excludes discouraged workers, which are people that at one point were looking for a job, but they gave up. Another indicator that the economy is doing so well is that banks are increasingly having to tap the Federal Reserve standing repo facility because we're potentially coming into a liquidity crisis. Now, the Fed's repo facility, it's a standing repo facility, and that's where banks can swap out their collateral like U.S. Treasuries for cash, so that way they can meet their reserve requirements and settle up trades. And banks are potentially, see, the banks can do that in either open market operations or they can do it through the Fed standing repo facility. Now, the reason I think that they're doing that is because I think they're tapping the Fed instead of going to the open market because they're concerned about the rate volatility spiking. You know, that's what happened in 2019. Basically, the open market lost control of the repo rate, the interest rate, which they have to pay to borrow that money. And so the Fed had to step into the repo market. Now, on top of all this, we're $38 trillion in debt. But hey, if you listen to Trump, it's the greatest economy ever. And anybody that goes against him is a naysayer. They're a pessimist. And, speaking of who you're looking to for inflation data, Trump thinks that Walmart might be the best, source of data for inflation. So maybe that's who Jerome Powell needs to check with next time he's considering interest rate cuts. Jerome Powell should just go to Walmart and ask Walmart what they think. So Trump points to Walmart for his inflation data, saying, hey, look, Walmart says Thanksgiving dinner is 25% cheaper than last year. Well, see, this was easily debunked with a quick search, and it shows that the Walmart claim is based on their comparison of an adjusted basket of goods. You see, the goods that they used this year, the basket that they used is actually contains 6 less items. And also they substituted name brand items with their Walmart Great Value brand. And this is exactly the kind of manipulation and price misrepresentation that they use to rig the CPI. You see, they use adjustments and substitution to change the basket of goods that they use. And, like they make the point that they change the basket of goods that they use because consumer behavior changes. And yeah, consumer behavior changes because prices change, which basically influences them to change. So that's another reason why the CPI is never accurately going to it's never going to accurately gauge inflation. So like if you go from eating ribeye steaks and then ribeyes become too expensive, so you start buying flank steaks, well, they can just substitute that out in their metric. And instead of measuring the price of ribeyes, they'll measure the cost of flank. Now, your quality of living has decreased because you just went from eating ribeyes to now you're eating flanks. So they don't consider that. But when they do take quality into consideration, they use what's called hedonic adjustments. So they do that a lot of times with technology and different things because they say, well, the quality improved. So even though the price went up, we're not going to consider that a price increase. So let's say you got the iPhone that came out last year. Well, let's say last year the iPhone was $1,000. And this year the new iPhone that comes out, I don't know what it, iPhone 25, whatever. So iPhone 25 comes out and it's $1,100. Well, see, you would look at that and say, well, that's a 10% price increase. But the CPI would say, well, it's got a updated operating system and a new camera, so we're going to call that a wash. We're going to say that there's no price increase there. And then Trump makes the point that egg prices are coming down. So that's why, I didn't play that in the clip, but he goes on in the interview to say that he uses egg prices. Look, Trump doesn't know why egg prices came down. What was it? Because there wasn't as much bird flu going around, so the chickens didn't have to be killed off, so egg production was up? Or did people change their breakfast habits? Now maybe instead of eating eggs, they're eating more oatmeal or yogurt. That's the thing. That's the problem when you try to centrally plan an economy, is that you don't know. You can try to look and you can try to guess, but you don't know. And that's why central planning always fails. Central planning and different metrics that they use like CPI, they can't measure why consumers change what they do. And that's why the best way to let prices regulate themselves is in the market. You don't need the government to do that. And that's why the freer market you have, the more accurate your price mechanism will be. Another way that they manipulate, just while we're talking about the CPI, another way that they, calculate the CPI is shelter cost, housing, and I think it's 1/3 of the CPI is based on housing cost. And one of the main factors that they use for figuring up housing cost is homeowners equivalent rent survey. Now they just survey random homeowners and ask what they would charge to rent their homes. They don't call like a realtor or developer or actually look at the housing prices or the rent prices in an area. They just do a survey and they say, what would you charge? And most people don't know anything about, the real estate market or rental markets. They look at whatever their mortgage cost, and that's what they tell them on the survey. And your mortgage is more than likely going to be a lot lower than what rent is in your area. And so inflation, when you consider how inflation is factored, it's probably a lot higher than 3%. But Trump says that anyone that focuses on any of that is just crazy, and he continues to attack any critics. And the Republican Party is going to play this team game, like, oh, we got a Republican in office, so we're just going to go along with everything he says. They're doing it at their own peril. This is the same thing the Obama administration did, which is why we got Trump in 2016. You see, after the recovery, everybody knew that the recovery was all bogus. And the only person that was actually out there saying that and that people believed was Donald Trump. And that's why Donald Trump won in 2016 and not the Democrats, because everybody knew that there was no real recovery. This is why Donald Trump lost in 2020, because Donald Trump told everybody how great the economy was, but nobody felt it. And it's the same reason that Biden and Harris lost in 2024. Now, I know Biden wasn't running because, the Democratic Party basically screwed that guy out and put Harris in. But they just said, no, Harris said, I wouldn't do anything different. Everything's great. Everything's not great. And they have to stop lying about it. But, when you do have real conservative Republicans like Thomas Massie, Trump's attacking him because Thomas Massie's voting against the increased spending. He's trying to actually make the case. Like, speaking of back to the beef thing, like Thomas Massie did an interview with Matt Kibb and was talking about that. You see, Thomas Massie raises cattle, and Thomas Massie was talking about all the problems, with the government intervention into the beef markets and what causes prices to be high. Donald Trump attacks Rand Paul for saying that we shouldn't be bombing Venezuelan boats and trying to start regime change wars in Venezuela. The United States has been trying to carry out regime change in Venezuela for decades now, going all the way back to Hugo Chavez. It has nothing to do with wanting to stop drugs from coming into the country. I mean, there's a history of our government bringing drugs into the country. The CIA, those guys are bringing drugs in and selling it so they can fund some of their black operations. But basically, this is Trump's second opportunity to come in and level with the American people about the dire economic situation that we're in. He could have came in and said, look, this is what we're looking at. Okay, we're going to have to make some very painful choices. We're going to have to make some cuts. People are going to have to tighten their belt, and it's going to get bad. But then once we get through it, everything's going to get better. But instead, he comes in and just talks about how everything's great. The government's got to stop pissing on people and telling them it's raining. Look, people are not stupid, okay? Now, don't get me wrong, there's stupid people, but for the most part, people aren't stupid. I do think we have a lot of ignorant people in this country, meaning that they're ignorant of a lot of facts. They're ignorant of a lot of the ways that they've been misled, but they're not stupid, okay? They're being fed bad information. And that's where, we, the people that believe in freedom and free markets, need to really get loud and not support Donald Trump. And not say that this is par for the course, everything's great. Because in 2028, I'm telling you, we're going to end up with some radical socialist in there, and things are going to get real bad. Like, Donald Trump's like socialist light, okay? We're going to end up with a Mamdani in the White House. And the more people just play this game, got to support Donald Trump no matter what, because he's a Republican. and we're not woke, whatever else they want to make the weak case for. We have to be talking about what capitalism really is, how that can fix problems, how we got to get government out of more government is not the solution. Higher tariffs are not the solution. We have to advocate for free markets. We have to and don't get me wrong, what comes with that is a hard correction. There's going to be, whenever we do have the correction that needs to come, it's going to be some economic pain. But we have to get through that so that way that the economy can actually grow and create a solid base to build upon. Because right now it's built upon government debt, government spending, artificially low interest rates. That's why the Fed can't normalize rates, because our economy is dependent upon it. We've created a dependent economy. They've done a pretty good job of creating a dependent, base of citizens. People, we saw that with the government shutdown, how many people rely on the government. We got to get away from that. And I get it. It can't be just like ripping a Band-Aid off, but we have to start making the changes in our lives to get the government out and allow freedom to flourish. There's that old quote, like those who would trade freedom for security deserve both, or deserve neither, and will surely lose both. And that's true. Everybody that wants to give up their freedom so the government can make you feel safe will understand that in exchange for you giving up that freedom, the government's going to take. And now all of a sudden you don't get to control that aspect of your life any longer.